Good evening and welcome. I'd like to welcome you all here to this crash conference entitled Port-au-Prince, Haiti, Living and Working in Chaos, with a question mark, which is probably unnecessary. This is the fourth in a cycle of rather special crash conferences. We started it a little over a year ago in 2023. These conferences are devoted to what we call borderline situations, situations and contexts where our action becomes particularly difficult and delicate, either because of the compromises that we have to make or because of the authoritarian nature of the regimes that we have to deal with, or the extreme risks that we're led to take, or sometimes the extreme violence that we're witnessing. There was a conference on humanitarian aid in Syria, another on the fate of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, and one more recently on Gaza and Ukraine. So tonight we will be talking about Haiti. So why talk about Haiti in this as part of this round of conferences? Well, it seems very obvious given the extremely high level of violence and insecurity that the population is experiencing, as well as the difficulties that MSF teams are encountering. These difficulties and this violence is not completely new, but the deterioration has been dramatic in recent years, and particularly in 2024. I'm going to let our guests get into detail, but just to give you sort of the general scene very quickly, Port-au-Prince is a city which is now controlled by gangs for 85% of the city. Those gangs commit multiple types of violence, extortion, kidnapping, sometimes violent massacres and death and racketing and rape and other things. The number of violent deaths in 2024 was over 5,000 people. This is also a tremendous increase. Also, a number of violent incidences that are not just due to the gangs, but also to combats with the police and with the self-defense vigilantes. The number of displaced people, people displaced by violence, was 300,000 last year. We're up to now 1 million people in a country that includes 11 million people. There's also an acute political and institutional crisis. Most of the institutions are completely dysfunctional or at a standstill. There's also a collapse in public services. Only 30% of health care structures are functioning in Port-au-Prince, and this is not going to get any better because the USAID funds, which have been cut off, contributed 60% of the financing for the humanitarian response plan for Haiti. On the MSF side, the teams have been managing in the past few years at the cost of a lot of patience and painstaking work with various actors of the violence in Port-au-Prince, including the gangs, and had managed to be largely spared from the violence, and were able to navigate within that chaos. And I'd like to recommend a work that was documented on this networking by Jacob Burns. It's called The Ones Who Care for Us. And there will be a podcast, crash podcast that will be available starting next week, an interview with Mumuza, who is head of a mission in Haiti. But more recently, in November 2024, MSF teams began having serious incidences with the police and self-defense vigilantes, which reminded us of the difficulty of finding the right position. These difficulties with the police are not completely new, but it did remind us how difficult it is in Haiti to find the right balance and how to be useful, or rather, how to make sure that the utility, the usefulness that we represent, not be reproached by the other actors. So, for example, when we're useful to gangs, then the police reproach that because we care for the members of the gangs. So we also would like to recommend a recent contribution by our colleague Jean-Baptiste Marian, who is with us tonight, and wrote about these issues on the souk. He wrote about the questions involving our safety and our usefulness to the various players. So, to go into more detail with all of these questions, without pretending to answer them, we're going to at least try to partially answer the questions and talk about the dynamics of violence and how they operate, how they affect people and our operations and our ability to care for people. And we're going to talk about the various players involved in the situation in Haiti and all of those who suffer from the violence as well. So it is our great pleasure to welcome 4 guests tonight. I'm going to start with those who are connected remotely. First, we have Pascale Solages, and we're very, very happy to have her with us tonight. And I'd really like to thank her even more warmly because she accepted to replace a guest that we had initially announced, Rosie Auguste Dusenat, who was forced to cancel her participation. She is a human rights lawyer in Haiti, and she had to cancel her participation, and Pascale agreed on very short notice to be with us tonight. Pascale, we asked you to be with us because you are a figure who represents Haitian civil society. You're a feminist activist and co-founder and general coordinator for the feminist organization Neges Mawon. That organization was founded in 2015 and works in particular to prevent violence against women. So we also have connected remotely Arnaud Dandoy, and I'd like to thank him as well. Good evening, Arnaud. You are a doctor in criminology and co-director of CRESEJ, a research and exchange center on safety and justice. That center has published many studies and reports on the situation in Haiti, particularly in regards to justice and the prison situation. And I believe you lived in Haiti for several years. And you are currently in Tunis, where you're working with Lawyers Without Borders. Welcome, Arnaud. And we also have with us here in the room tonight, we have Romain Le Cour Grandmaison. Thank you very much for having invited our invitation. You are a doctor in political science, program director for Haiti at the NGO Global Initiative for Transnational Organized Crime, GITOC. And that NGO also writes reports, studies, and notes for decision makers, particularly. And the reports concern organized crime. In the past, you've worked a lot on Mexico, on these issues regarding violence and organized crime. Would you like to add or correct anything I've said? No. Okay, so thank you, and welcome to Romain. And then finally, Sarah Chateau, whom you all know. She is head of unit here in Paris and supervises programs in several countries, including Haiti, and she's been with us for many board meetings and many other events to talk about the situation in Haiti. So, Sarah, I'm going to start with you to give us the MSF point of view. So to try and give you a general picture of the difficulties that we're encountering, but also the type of work that we do, can you give us a reminder of the general situation and how MSF has been working in Port-au-Prince in recent years? What has that cost our teams, and what type of compromises have been made? And also tell us about the recent incidences that took place now. That's changed our point of view. Good evening. I'm going to try and give you a general picture. It's a very complex situation. There are a lot of stakes involved, and it's a very risky situation, and the operational will of our teams, our MSF teams, have been defending the work we do and the role that we play in that context on a daily basis, and we're constantly present in Port-au-Prince, and we have a program, and we also have a program in the other regions around Port-au-Prince, which we don't talk to it as much. There's also gang violence in other areas of Haiti, but the scale of the situation is such that we talk mostly about Port-au-Prince. So at MSF, we are currently present in 3 sections. We have 2 hospitals, trauma hospitals, where we take in the wounded, mostly people who have gunshot wounds. 80% of our patients have been shot, and this is true in the Port-au-Prince and in the suburbs. We also have a special unit for burns. We also have 2 emergency rooms where we take in patients who need emergency care, and we also refer them to other caretakers, and we also have we have one of those is in a part of the city that's not controlled by the gangs, and the other is in Cité Soleil, which is where several gangs are present, and I can tell you a little bit more about those different areas. We also have mobile clinics, and we also have a special unit for victims of sexual violence. You have to remember that we have in each of these clinics 10 new patients, at least 10 new patients in each of these clinics. Many of them, we have 10 new sexual violence victims in each of these clinics. So we have 400 to 500 new victims in the city every month. So we have a lot of national colleagues working as well. MSF includes 1,800 employees in the city, and they work every day. They go from their own homes to our hospital structures or our clinics, and every time they go to work, they're taking a risk. This is really something that just moving around on a daily basis is risky. It's difficult to feel safe for our staff because, as Judith mentioned, there are incidents and there are risks very often, and kidnapping is one of the risks. And when you move around in the public space, that's where you are the most exposed to kidnapping. And we have had a series of incidents with MSF staff, and sometimes our colleagues, sometimes it's individuals moving around, sometimes it's even an MSF car or a group of people who are exposed to being arrested, being harassed, or being victims of violence. So how have we been experiencing this in the past few years? We've been looking a lot at how we've navigated this situation over the past few years and what different steps we've put into place, how we negotiate with the different other players, how we maintain our space, and how far we should go in exposing ourselves to risk. How do we talk about these risks with our teams? You mentioned board meetings, but one of the questions is how do we tell people about what our staff and the population experience in terms of violence, and how can we make our decisions based on those experiences? How do we suspend our activities so we could continue to work given this context? And so this is a subject that which in Haiti and any violent context needs to be continually rethought. We've been lucky enough in the past few years to have teams that are really doing a lot of work on negotiation and engagement with the various players. When we go back to the transition period since the assassination of the former president in 2021, there's been an evolution, a development in 2021, 2022. We reinforced our negotiation processes with the gangs. So this is something that our teams on the field did, mostly the mission head, but also the coordinators who are on the field, who have worked to identify the gangs and to try to understand the networks, try to understand what the different nodules of those networks are and what are the key points that are most important, and then to assume that based on our exchange and our negotiation and the understanding of those networks that we could then we could then influence the gang heads' view of us. And basically this has worked very well. We've been accepted in zones that are extremely complicated where no other players were present except for us. And here I'm talking specifically about the Cité Soleil. Up until 2023, there was there were no other humanitarian workers in Cité Soleil other than us. But this has been a tremendous effort that we've made, and we also identified the police, the national police, as an important actor. And since 2021, we've had ongoing contacts with the administration, and it was simple enough. And the high authorities, the directors of the police stations, and had a good view of us. We were accepted, but that the contexts have changed, and we realized recently, unfortunately because of incidents, that within the police corps, the information wasn't shared exactly in the same way as it was within the gangs, and so the the networking within the police department differed between the high level authorities and the police officers on the field. And unfortunately, because of those incidences, and particularly recently in November 2024, there were several threatening experiences. We realized that the police officers on the field had a very negative view of MSF because we do also care for gang members. And so that's why we've started looking more closely at how we could improve our networking, our negotiation, taking into account lots of different elements, because the police officers on the field are a lot of different individual elements, and they don't necessarily all have the same relationship with the authorities. They don't all necessarily agree on what the hierarchy has decided. It's not the same as it's not as clear as with the gangs, in fact. And so we did some mapping, player mapping, to try to understand how the different players think about the situation. And in the past few years, we've looked a lot at the police and the vigilantes. In July 2023, there was a break-in in one of our structures. In December 23, a patient in Turgeau was taken out of an ambulance and killed in front of our teams. And more recently, an ambulance team was arrested and held by the by the police. They were gassed and threatened, and the patients were abducted from the ambulance to be what we assume was an assassination, because the teams heard shots. And all of our all of our drivers are stopped at the checkpoints, and they are threatened. The police say that MSF is being watched, that if we continue to care for the gang members, that we will be killed as well. So our teams are really exposed to a lot of risk, and we have to try to figure out how to understand these risks and how to explain our medical mission. It's not even a question of neutrality. We're here to care for people. We care for everyone. We care for gang members, but we've also cared for police officers, members of the army, and of course civilians. So it's that whole complexity. And I'll stop here and give the floor over to the other guests. Great, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for having given us a quick overview of the situation from the point of view of MSF. Maybe, Pascale, you could give us a broader view. Maybe you could tell us more generally about how general everyday lives are affected by this violent dynamics on an everyday basis. And I'll just let you also maybe tell us a little bit more about the situation, particularly in regards to sexual violence, which is your specialty. And I know that you're here and sort of at the last minute, so please feel free to talk about whatever subjects you feel are important to tell us about, because we didn't have a lot of time to prepare this together. And so over to you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. It's easy to replace OZ. OZ is part of the consultative committee, and we work together. Our two organizations work together. And we also work on our own. It's easy to replace OZ because we work together. We talk together in panels and we work together in different topics. And at the time when we organized the panel, an MSF team left the office in Port-au-Prince. We've organized a meeting this morning to see how we will improve things in 2025, especially how we can support people who are working on violence. So Gaimont, this is an institution we're working with since 2017, and they are helping us. This is a feminist organization. They're helping us at all levels, and especially for our home, for our shelter that we have in the extreme south of Port-au-Prince, where you have your Carrefour hospital. So this is a partnership that we have set up. At the end of last year, we wrote 6 articles to document cases, stories of women who were survivors of these gangs. And MSF was mentioned because most of the time, all our survivors, they all survived thanks to MSF. So we, as a feminist organization, I'd like to begin by saying how it is extremely difficult, whether it is for MSF or for a feminist organization like Neges Mao, to work, especially in Port-au-Prince, in the current context, and this at all levels. Neges Mao is a feminist organization, but we also work in advocacy to make sure that we change things politically, socially, from the economic point of view, and so on and so forth, because all this has direct impacts on the situation of women and young girls and on all the work we have to do on a daily basis. Neges Mao started accompanying survivors of violence in 2017, but the context was very different, although there were safety challenges, especially in the metropolitan area, but the situation got worse from 2018 onwards, from November 2018, and that totally transformed not only the map, but the context of what we're going through at Port-au-Prince and in the entire country. From November 2018 onwards, when there was the Saline massacre, and in response to the Petrocarbon Challenge movement to ask for the management of the Petro-Caribbean funds. But the first massacre this year was the massacre of Saline to stop the Grand Mosque that was in November 2018 for the Petrocarbon Challenge. And that's when we have the Saline massacre. 78 people were murdered. We can talk about the report from the NOSI organization, the RNDTH, on the Saline massacre. And from then onwards, we will see the extent of the power of the gangs that's really going to increase from then onwards, because there was the use of the gang squads by the political forces and the government to control the popular movement against corruption, the Petro-Caribbean Challenge. And from this massacre onwards, there will be continuous massacres in the following years. And the power of these gangs is going to increase over the national territory, and especially in the metropolitan area, because people from the political sector, players from the economic sector had a certain control and would also use these armed squads. So we will have activists in the human rights organizations, in the feminist organizations, organizations against corruption like the Pape de Mai, and they will put pressure on this question of corruption and Security. And the work of this organization is going to change because a feminist organization like Negasmau that would welcome women and young girls who've survived violences, but also in the domestic framework, what was happening in the homes, in the families, these organizations will end up in situations where we have to help women and young girls surviving violence, but also the women surviving these armed squads. So this will change our context, but this will make us change and adapt our approach. So we are in a context where politically we have 10 years without elections. In 2025, it's been 10 years we haven't had any elections in the country. So this is a major political crisis because we don't have any elected officials, whether it's at the parliament, locally, etc. We don't have any elections, political elections. And from 2023 onwards, we started a political transition after years of advocacy so as to go back to a democracy. So that is to tell you about the context today, because that is the political context that's going to give rise to all the other contexts in this crisis, the corruption, impunity, etc. 2021, there was the assassination of the president, and that's another factor in the crisis, not only political, but also from the point of view of security. But we have to go back to 2018, as I said. And today we have a political transition in Haiti. And unfortunately, this does not meet the ambition. That is the question of this break transition. That's how the players who've proposed this transition, especially the Montana group, players from the Nupap Delmi group, that have worked for years now to obtain this transition. The ambition is to have a break in the situation, but this transition is not meeting the ambition of this break at all levels. And I see something, one aspect that is very interesting to me. We have a government where we have only 22% of women when normally the quota should be 30%. And the ambition is to hold elections and a constitutional reform, but all this is totally opaque. So it's this political crisis that will lead the way to other aspects in this crisis. And if we examine all the reports, the UN report on the links between the political players, the gangs, impunity, corruption, etc. In 2024, we had the two major crises in Port-au-Prince, the chair break. And so now 4,000 prisoners are in the streets. And this is important when you want to analyze safety and the political crisis. And what's really amusing is that there is not a single search warrant that is circulated to identify the prisoners that have escaped and to get hold of them, to apprehend them, and put them back in jail, etc. So therefore, this element is very important if we analyze the political aspect. And this political crisis will increase the social challenges, all the right to have housing, to work, all the social and economic rights of all the population. So all the social rights are going to fall behind because of this political crisis. At the end of last year, there wasn't a single maternity that was open in Port-au-Prince. So for all the social rights, there's a major fallback because of the crisis too, since 2018, especially the right to safety. We have more than 1 million people who have been displaced in the country, and most of them are in Port-au-Prince, and most of them are women and children. And the social laws are going backwards, and the economic aspect is very important to analyze. We were already in a cycle of economic crisis in the last decade, but with this crisis that got worse in 2018, inflation boomed in Haiti. The population is poor, and the population that was extremely vulnerable, especially women, they will become even poorer. This fragment of the population is going to become poor from this crisis onwards, from 2018 onwards. And from then onwards, things are not going to get better. And we've analyzed sections, various sectors in Haiti. When you look at the informal economic sector in Haiti, in the entire sector, we have 90% of women. The informal sector is totally paralyzed because of the safety crisis. Why? Because the informal economic sector works in an interdependent fashion. When you look at the various players in the informal economic sector, these are people who travel over the entire territory to carry out all the economic activities. But today, most of the national roads are controlled by these armed squads. One of the members of our group had to travel, and she had to go through 6 stations just to travel 2 hours on a national route. In the southern route, we have our housing, which is close to the MSF hospital. Our staff has to go through several toll stations to go from the west to the south. And today, these are toll stations, but 2 or 3 years ago, there were many cases of murders on these national roads because then the gangs would shoot on the buses and the private cars. And economically, they realized that it didn't make any sense. And now the model that's been developed from the west to the north, from the west to the center and to the south, is to develop these payment or toll stations. And if you look and read the reports, you're going to see how much it costs for a person to go from west to south by going through all these tolls. And this has a direct impact on the informal economic sector because today, any person who has to go from one department to another sees his costs really boom in terms of logistics and transport to go from one place to another. And there's this crisis between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. I have to remind you that the people who are in this sector export, import a lot from the Dominican Republic. And with the crisis that exists between the Dominican Republic and Haiti, what exists between the different departments because of these armed squads and the weakening of the farming sector, these are factors that we need to analyze to understand the economic aspect of this crisis, although there are many other factors that we need to take into account. And then there is the worst aspect, which is the safety. When you look at the different reports, 80% or even more of the metropolitan area of the capital, Port-au-Prince, is controlled by the gangs, and most of the territory is also controlled by these armed gangs. So more than 1 million of our population are displaced, the zones controlled by gangs. And the last massacre was in Kaskov. The FGKL report has come out. We talk about some 100 people who've been murdered in the last Kaskov attack. We can also talk about what happened last week. 3 of the major leaders of these gangs got together and organized a carnival with some 1,000 people in one area and district of Port-au-Prince. So you have to look at all the murders and safety, the number of people who are murdered last year. Last year, 5,000 people were murdered. And you have to look at the complex relations between the communities and these armed gangs. So today, the leaders of these gangs have a total freedom of circulation and movement on the entire territory in the capital. They mobilized themselves together. They created this coalition of Vivre Ensemble, and they mobilized the population. When you look at the images in the social media with leaders like Barbecue, who is addressing himself to the population during this carnival, where there were floats in the streets, music, DJs. He is addressing himself to thousands of people who are there for these festivities organized by these gangs. And the government is incapable of organizing a carnival in a city. The carnival is organized in Chama, but not in Port-au-Prince. And so this is why a lot of organizations are against these national forces, and the control of these armed gangs is not just a question of conflicts, murders, assassinations, and kidnappings, abductions, but how the control of the territories is done in a very complex way. Today we see images circulating with gangs who are giving money for the new school year, hospitals that are developing social projects in their communities. So there is a very complex relationship with these gangs who are are killing people and gangs who are controlling the population because the government is totally absent from these communities. And things are going to become more complicated for MSF and Negus Mao because this controls not only a conflict where a situation where there are conflicts, but there are other aspects. Before going into the details of all these difficulties, I will ask Romain to tell us and to tell us more about what you've just mentioned, this control of all these gangs, so that he can tell us his point of view, and then we'll come back on what you've started telling us about. Because, Romain, I wanted to ask you about this expression that you use in your work, which is the ecosystems. You talk about gangs who are part of this ecosystem of violence. So, talking about ecosystem, that means talking about links, interdependency. And so, as Pascal just mentioned, we see that there's a lot of circulation, a lot of interactions between the various groups. Pascal, you talked about corruption, collusion. So, Romain, can you tell us a little more about this ecosystem? What is it made up of? How has it changed? Pascal also mentioned vivre ensemble. Can you tell us a little more about this group? Because this is very important in this situation. Thank you. Thank you very much, Judith, and thank you, Pascal, for having presented all these important points in your introduction. So, to tell you about the context, I'm lucky because I can do research in the field in Haiti. I can move around and talk to everybody, whether it's in Port-au-Prince. I go to the different regions also in Haiti. And my core research and analysis is to better understand what you presented, Pascal. That is the territorial control, the social control of all the criminal groups in Haiti, and what we can call the governance, the ability of all these criminal groups in Haiti to dominate territorially, socially, and to organize the daily lives in the territories that they directly control. And by ricochet, more or less direct ricochet, the daily lives of all the people in part of the country. And that is why I use this term ecosystem that I like more or less, but I think it really describes the situation well, because even if you live in an area that is not directly controlled by the gangs, your life is impacted by ricochet, by the violence of the gangs, by their presence, by their ability to govern and to dominate. And I think Pascal has described the contours, and MSF is in the front line to testify this. There's been a lot of evolution in the nature of the gangs in the past few years, and we don't really understand that abroad when we use the word gang, because in our imagination, this means small groups, young people who are poor, badly organized. In our imagination, these are street gangs that we have, for example, in the US, which can be quite different, or Latino, South African gangs, or Nigerian gangs that we think of when we talk about gangs, groups, cells that are not clearly hierarchized in large territories or not very well organized in their ability to deploy themselves and to organize different activities, and that do not have a political dimension. In Haiti, and in this transformation this country has gone through in the public sectors, private sectors, and with all these violent groups, in the past 3-4 years, and this has boomed in the past 2 years. It's this ability of these groups to become more bureaucratic, to organize themselves and to work together. And that is this coalition, which has this tragic name of Vivre Ensemble. This coalition of gangs that was created last year to unify all the Haitian groups under a single banner. Their functioning is interesting. We can go back on this if you have any questions later on. Sorry for this analogy, but it looks like NATO. Within the coalition, the groups have a lot of maneuvering margin. These groups keep dominating over their territory, but they use all the resources together either to defend themselves or to attack. And this has really changed the situation since last year because actually these gangs, unless there are some exceptional cases, sometimes in Cité Soleil there were some violent incidents, but they were short-lived. But the gangs don't fight against each other since a year, and this has deeply changed the situation and the situation of violence in the country and their ability to strengthen their governance capacity over their territory and to divide. There's this section which is not controlled by the gangs, which is very small, but to divide the space in Port-au-Prince where you can move freely, and the rest of the territories, which are either disputed territories, that is the territories in the fringes, and a large section of the capital. And apart from MSF and a few humanitarian or international organizations, nobody can enter anymore. And the gangs have domination. The daily lives of the people is totally managed by these criminal leaders. And so this is the general context. And to go back on something mentioned by Pascale at the end, which is revelation that really illustrates this ability of these gangs to take care of all the bureaucracy. There's this question of extortion and racketing. Extortion and racketing is quite old in Haiti because since a long time, there is a lot of interdependency between the private sector and all these violent local groups and the police, because you can externalize. This is not just for Haiti, it's happening in many places. You can privatize security, where you pay a local group, a gang, or the police to ensure the safety of your activities, of your warehouses, your streets, your district. You can do that. But what we see today, and things have changed quite rapidly in a very brutal and dramatic way in this organization, is this ability to extort and to racket. And this is done by the gangs. And this goes through because they control all the country infrastructure. This is what Pascale said. It's a bit deceitful when we use the word gang, but the criminal groups in Haiti control all the critical public or private infrastructure, whether it is the entire coastline in Port-au-Prince, that is controlled by the gangs. All the national roads, the important roads, are controlled by the gangs. The greater part of all the border control checkpoints are also controlled by the gangs. And it's also the case of the roads linking Port-au-Prince to the rest of the country. And every day, goods circulate on these roads, and they levy taxes for the containers arriving in Haiti, for all the goods circulating from the Haiti ports. And this is also true for certain activities that you have to carry out in the territories controlled by the gangs. There's a very complex relationship between various players and the criminal groups. And this is also true for the checkpoints, which is the immersed part of the iceberg. There are hundreds of checkpoints in Haiti. There are dozens in Port-au-Prince. There are hundreds in the country. They're very well organized. Pascale knows about all that. There are checkpoints where things are managed on a weekly basis so that you don't waste time when you go there every day with your goods. You pay a person on the Saturdays, and they pay the taxes of the gangs every Saturday so that you can go through during the whole weekend so that you are free to pass at these checkpoints. So I think you have to talk about the context of these Haitian criminal organizations. These criminal organizations are highly fragmented because there are a great number of them, but they have united and now they work together within this coalition Vivre Ensemble. And we're going to celebrate a year of existence of this coalition and their ability to organize themselves so they can work better together and extend their political and social domination in the country. That is the major evolution in 2024. Now, does that mean that the gangs that were supported, financed by elites to serve their own interests, are they going to be the judges of this situation? Does that mean that the gangs are going to be the creature that is going to escape the creator? So what is their degree of power? We see that they're very powerful, but are they still tools in the hands of these corrupt elites? So that is the $1 million question. What is interesting in Haiti, and Pascale can talk about this much better than I can, is the relations between the public sector, the private sector, and the criminal groups. Everybody says that they exist. Nobody's going to say there's no relationship between the private and public sectors and these gangs in Haiti. It is there. It's been there in the history of the country. So we start with this idea that they exist. And this has been very well documented by Haitian groups and internationally. We have trouble going from this idea that, yeah, it exists to the demonstration to bring proof, even legal material proof that these relations exist. There's a fundamental gap. It's fundamental in this legal sense. It's very difficult to prove the links between the criminal groups, criminal leaders, and the public and private players. And it is even more so because these relations have really changed. The way we try to work on this, to model this, to understand this, is to say that the argument according to which these gangs have become more independent and have escaped their creator, this is reducing the meaning of all this. And there is a political risk because these creators might be free to do all that they want to do. And yeah, they did stupid things in the past, but it escaped them and now they don't control anything anymore. So what we've documented through research and analysis is that these relations still exist, but these relations are more violent, more unstable, and more balanced probably between the gang leaders. Not all of them. There's a lot of heterogeneity between these gang leaders, but some leaders can sit and speak face to face with other people who were recently still just giving them orders. Today, what we realize, and according to me, that's a major part of the problem, and this is why the situation is even more complex and violent, is that the number of players spending their time negotiating everything, that has exploded. And Pascale, you know that better than anybody else at MSF. What is terrible at Port-au-Prince is that whatever activity you have, especially if this activity means that you have to move around, you have to always negotiate with a number of players that is increasing all the time. At one point, you had 10 people when you have 10 people, it's very unstable, it's very complex. The 10 people would ask you for all kinds of different things, and you'll have to start doing this several times a day, even sometimes, to receive the same authorizations, the same agreements that you obtained more easily a few years ago. And between the private sector and public sectors and these criminal groups, we know that they have these relations. We know that they're changing. We know that things are negotiated all the time. And there is a lot of violence in these negotiations. And we can imagine that in this period of political transition, as Pascale was saying on the paper, and there aren't many people who believe in this, but to go towards a referendum and elections in 2025, we can bank on the fact that these relations with the public and the private sectors and these criminal groups, it's going to become far more complex, more violent, more intense. And the organization of elections will put at the center all these negotiations that exist between the three sectors in Haiti. So these relations exist. There's an independence of these gangs, financial independence because of extortion and racketing, but there's no division, a fracture, or independence between all these gangs.
So we're talking a lot about gangs. It's difficult to not talk a lot about gangs, even though from the MSF point of view, as I said in the introduction, and as Sarah said earlier, it is the greatest risks have come from elsewhere, not from the gangs, but from the police and the vigilantes. But first, I'd like to give the floor to Arnaud, and I'd like to ask Arnaud to tell us about these vigilantes, even though it might seem more logical to first to talk about the police, but you will see that the police and the vigilantes work actually pretty closely together. So Arnaud, what I would like to know, you published a historic work on the vigilantes. We talk about these self-defense vigilantes. We talk about Bois Calais. That's the name that was created to designate them in 2023. But it's not because there's a new name that this is a new phenomenon. And that's the question that I'd like to ask you. You have worked on these vigilantes in the past. You're the co-author with Robertson Edwards, a sociologist. You co-authored a report on vigilantism in Haiti. So how do you see that phenomena? What is the phenomena all about? And can you give us an illustration and tell us about the different variants? So thank you very much. First of all, thank you for having invited me tonight, and thank you for all these other speakers who are raising a lot of questions and that are related to what I'll be talking about. The book that we wrote with Robertson in 2017 is still very relevant today in regards to what's happening today in Haiti. And this, I think, could feed into our thinking. In fact, it's relatively surprising. It was surprising when we started the research that we realized that there was actually very little research done on those vigilantes. But it is and yet it's a phenomena that has taken on even more importance in recent history, even though it's not been studied very much. And I actually got interested in this movement of popular justice when I was teaching in Quisqueya, and one morning I saw a lot of students come in late. First, I was unhappy. The course had already started an hour ago, but I could see that they looked very tired. They had bags under their eyes, and this was back in 2019. And they started telling me that they had spent the night keeping watch because there was a rumor. I don't know, Pascale, if you were in Haiti at the time. There was a rumor going around, a terrifying rumor that was going around, according to which there were bandits going into houses, forcing fathers to rape their daughters, threatening to rape them with a cow's horn, which led to the name of the cow's horn rumor. This was never proven nor disproven, but it did start a panic, and that's what started the creation of these vigilantes in the different neighborhoods in order to protect themselves from this real or imagined threat. There was also the night of the machetes, a terrifying event, and that's what started me looking at this phenomenon. And I started looking at the strength of the movement and the relations with the Bois Calais movement. I'm sure that many of you have heard of that. I'm sure you know about how this works and how. But I think it's maybe worthwhile going into it. In 2023, it's a popular justice movement which was set up after 14 presumed gangsters were lynched in a certain neighborhood, and starting after that lynching, there were a group of neighbors who got together and wanted to go out and try and find these gang members and even burn them alive. This is also because there was a lack of confidence in the prisons and prison system, in the police, in the government. And this goes back to what Pascale was mentioned about the escape of those 4,000 prisoners. There was the question of impunity in regards to crimes that are committed because the justice system didn't work, and the total dysfunction of the prison system with these massive escapes that date back many years, actually. Maybe just one detail on that subject. Among the 4,000 prisoners who escaped, not all of them are gang members. So we also did a recent study with Robertson that showed that 25% of the prison population was in prison for minor crimes, begging, minor petty thefts. But what the students in the criminology section that I was teaching, what they underlined was that prison is a school for crime, and that the gang members were actually recruiting their members in the prisons, and that there were indeed a lot of prisoners who went to Village de Dieu and other neighborhoods or other gangs, and that's what led to the current situation. I think that what you mentioned and is important is that the Bois Calais movement is not a question of spontaneous generation. It's not an isolated phenomena. It's a movement that's part of a very long tradition of self-defense in Haiti, where the population is faced with either the incapacity or the hostility of the authorities, and they're forced to protect themselves. The first vigilantes actually went back to the 1980s. Those vigilantes were formed created to help protect people from Tonton Macoute. And this led to a political ideology according to which the state and the security forces were a tool for repression on behalf of the elites. some vigilantes today are still refusing to work with the authorities, particularly with the national police. But there are some developments. Some vigilantes the vigilantes don't all have the same attitude. In 1994, when the armed forces of Haiti were dissolved, there was a movement of creation of new vigilantes to fill that security void, and also to resist the police who were seen as being corrupt. There were different crisis moments, whether they be natural disasters or political crises, and in these crisis situations, the popular solutions are set up. For example, to distribute food in the case of, in a crisis situation, because the official institutions were not able to do so. Now, as to the development, the ideology is less hostile and more pragmatic. It's actually due to a lack of other forms of protection. Most of the members of the vigilantes that we've talked to did not want these vigilantes to continue to exist. What they wanted was a strong, functional state that would be able to protect the public. So this is it's really a red light signal. As long as the state is weak and cannot protect the people from the violence of the gangs and the criminal gangs, then it was then they had the right to respond to that need for safety and security. In our report, we also explain regarding the arms, the weapons that were used. They used stones, and they called them the state cookies. They would throw these state cookies at the bandits who came into their neighborhoods as a way of driving them away. So that's just to explain that the Bois Collé movement is not an isolated movement, and it has a link to the history of Haiti. And I think it can dates back actually rather far. Thank you, Arnaud. I would have lots of other questions to ask all of you, but I think it would be a good idea to open up the floor to the audience and take some questions from the audience. But I'd just like to give the floor back to Pascale and see if she has anything to add to what was said by Romain and by Arnaud. Well, I'd just like to reinforce what Arnaud said, especially about the question of the jails in February 2024. Most of the people in the prisons are not gang members, and in fact, most people in prison had not even been to court. So you can see what that means. That means that this also participates in the weakness and the view of the state. Most of the people who were in prison had not been convicted because they had not been to trial. Others were there for various acts of violence, but this was a very traumatic episode, especially for women. Feminist groups received a lot of calls to talk about the abuse and when these prisoners were able to escape, the women often were in a panic situation because they said that my ex-husband or my rapist is now out free, and so this caused a lot of panic. And also, in regards to the complexity of the question of these armed vigilantes, it's a very complex situation for the feminist organizations, especially because even though we consider this as a two-sided situation. For example, in our group, Negus Marron, we went to get a woman in prison, and because she was in prison because she was going around knocking on doors, and a member of a vigilante arrested her, quote unquote, and she was able to escape. And despite that, the vigilante group had said that they would not let her go. Unfortunately, they took her to the police station. We were able to get her back. But this shows the relationship between the police and the vigilantes. When we took this woman to the police station, the police said, "Oh, well, so in that case, you're coming to the police station. Are you crazy?" It was, in fact, the vigilantes who had brought the young woman to the police, and it could have gone very poorly, especially if it had been a man rather than a woman. I believe that there's a lot of collateral damage involved with the vigilantes. And so we do understand that the poor governance does push people to take the situation into their own hands. But when you look at, for example, Mr. Muscadin's case, and where should we stop the general population's possibility to defend themselves? And my last comment is that we had to move 3 times because we were being threatened. And one of the questions that came up when you go to look for a house, if there's an armed vigilante, you have to go and talk to them and explain who you are, tell them that we're an organization, there will be unknown people coming through, and you have to justify yourself. So the freedom of movement is extremely complicated and complex, and there are 2 sides to that. So a lot of what Arnaud mentioned in regards to the research that he did and the work that's been done in Insecurity will be, I think, maybe dealt with through the questions from the audience. Thank you very much. Sarah, go ahead. Well, I just wanted to add something to echo what's been said. This week, in most neighborhoods for Port-au-Prince, the schools were closed because Barbecue, one of the main gang heads, said there would be an attack on Monday, February 3rd, and so everyone has to take these threats into account. So Monday and Tuesday, Pascale, you were there, so maybe you can tell us a little bit more, but most of the neighborhoods were just empty. There were no schools, no traffic, no markets, and so activities goes up and down. The children aren't in school all year because all these things keep happening, and so there's a whole generation of children being impacted by this situation. Pascale mentioned the massacre in Kinskov, a couple of years ago where there were 50 people were killed. That was one of the last roads that was not yet controlled by the gangs and was enabled people to leave Port-au-Prince. It's the road that most transport systems used to move south, and it went through neighborhoods that were controlled by the police. And that massacre occurred because, as Pascale said, the gangs wanted to add checkpoints and pay stations, and so now you can no longer go into Port-au-Prince by the main roads. But of course, there are small roads, but you can't go in through the main road because there are these checkpoints and these pay stations. A new gang head was named in Kingshof, and that person is one of the people who escaped last March. So these people are not being looked for. There's no arrest warrant, and these people are now on the front line with the police, who are trying to maintain certain zones outside of gang control. But how long will that situation last? We don't know. Mumuza explained a couple of years ago that in those zones that are being fought over, those zones that are not yet controlled by the gangs are the zones where there's the most violence and the most insecurity, because you have these vigilantes, these self-defense vigilantes, going around desperately trying to defend the last neighborhoods that are not yet controlled by the gangs. So I'd like to now open the floor up to the audience. Fabrice will be passing the microphone around. Hello, and thank you very much. My name is Michael. I work for the Crash as well, and I have two questions. We've talked, of course, a lot about violence and how it affects the society. But is there really still a society in Haiti, or has everyone been forced to take sides and be part of either a gang or a vigilante, or been taken sort of hostage by the control systems? And my second question concerns a player that we haven't mentioned yet, and that's the Kenyan or the Kenyan directed Multinational Security Support Mission. Was that something that was forgotten, or just that no one wanted to mention? I'd like to ask Romain to answer those questions, actually, please. Thank you. Well, I'll let Pascale talk about everyday life and the Haitian society. I would say that obviously Haitian society still exists. There's a lot of dynamism, paradoxically speaking. But as for the MSS, the Multilateral Security Support Mission, which is a very strange mission. First of all, I suppose you all know what a UN peacekeeping mission is. It corresponds to certain legal criteria, and there are logistical and financial structures that are set up by the UN. And in this case, there was a lot of opposition, including from the UN, to the idea of peacekeeping force, and so they came up with a hybrid system, and it's a force that mixes UN forces with a mandate that is very unclear, and particularly in regards to the funding. So it's almost completely funded by the US, then Canada, and then, modestly speaking, by France and other players. And the way that we analyze the situation is as follows. In order to not be the first to criticize that force, which is directed by Kenya, and then there are other countries that have sent officers as well. But this force is sort of between a rock and a hard place, and we criticize them for a lot, but they have not been given the means to function correctly. So we ask them to fix the situation in Haiti, which is just a gigantic task in itself, but they don't have the financial, strategic, or physical means to do it. And the most grounded criticism that we could make is the absence, and this is something that we've talked about with a lot of other actors. It was the absence of strategy when this force was created, and unfortunately, even now there's no operational or logistical strategy. There've also been a whole series of coordination and communication problems with the Haitian police. The Haitian police is also an institution which lacks almost everything, and they have tremendous problems, including systemic problems. But they continue as best they can to do what they can to defend certain neighborhoods. So once again, here, the response to the situation is not well designed, it's not well proportioned, and it's and you may have seen that this was there was the question came up at the UN Security Council to decide whether there should be an actual peacekeeping mission, and that was rejected. But the question is, should there be a peacekeeping mission, even though, in fact, on the field, there's been this unclear situation for so long now. Things are just not moving either forwards or backwards. Thank you, Romain. Pascale, can you maybe answer Michael's question on regarding Haitian society? And I'd like to extend that question a bit, because that's one of the questions that I had on the degree of polarization in a situation where there's such extreme violence. How can you avoid that polarization, and how is that felt in society? Well, the capacity of the different groups and different parts of the society to organize themselves within this dynamic is a good thing. But as I would have said earlier as well, this is again a two-sided blade. A few months ago, all air traffic was stopped. And then a couple of weeks ago, there was air traffic started up again, but only in the north of the country. And the institutions organized themselves within the country and outside of the country, and came to. They sent in helicopters and public transportation companies stepped up their activity, and so then last week Negesmao did other work. There are other new activities that are organized because things just are not working. Like schools aren't working, hospitals are not really working. All of those institutions are not really organizations. I don't exactly know how to say it. I don't know if we can still say that there's still a society, but people, and every time there's a change, people organize a response, and they organize their own survival.
But there are deep divides, social divides, which are very deep. Today, when you have a million people who are displaced, especially in the metropolitan area, the dynamism of co-living and all that is becoming very complicated. The socialization spaces, all that is very complicated, especially schools, because what is happening is that schools can work in certain zones, and there are schools that can work also virtually online because they have the means. But the national schools, and there are schools that don't work at all in certain zones. And there are very few private hospitals, but when you take the majority of the population that must go to the general hospital, where there was this disaster in December, where journalists were killed, where the former minister had to run away from, most of the population, whether it is MSF or other institutions offering health structures, most of the population does not have access to certain services. So this resistance mechanism, this organization is accessible to part of the population, very little, but the majority does not have access. And this will reinforce the divides in the population, which will reinforce violence in the society, in the different groups. So therefore, I'm not sure that I have an answer to your question, but what I know is that the social organizations, especially the civil society organizations, they relay in the absence of the state, whether to support, to provide services, to offer advocacy. They do it with all the means they have. The international organizations are also helping. When you go to the camps, where the population is displaced, you have all the services because of the international organizations with the help of civil society, but the state is almost absent, or the state is financed by the international organizations. The Ministry for the Feminine Condition, they receive funds to intervene in the communities. I do not know if that means that there is a society that exists. I know that there are an appearance of leisure. There are ways to organize, but I don't know how to answer that question, unfortunately. And to add on this question of MMS, it is quite sad that it is an initiative that took literally 2 years of advocacy internationally to install a multinational force in Haiti. But during these 2 years, as Romain said, for 2 years, there were 2 years of mobilization of advocacy and a total absence to create a strategy so that it might work. It's because we have to do something. That's the idea. We need to have something. But this something, will it be efficient, adapted, and will it meet the issues? We'll think about that afterwards. And it's the same question for today. Today we have Salvadorians coming, Kenyans coming. But the question is the problem of the multinational force because there isn't enough personnel? Is that the real problem? Should we send more soldiers or more policemen? Is that the solution? Is that the problem of the forces today? Not sure we are putting the right questions and we're not providing the right answers, but there are no results. And from that point of view, we do not have the choice. Just to say one thing, to answer the questions, I think the first thing is that we're observing a real political turn in international cooperation. All the social issues are dealt with by the OSCE, as Pascale was saying, according to their limited means, but also by the criminal situation. We've seen the large quantities of resources that have been used, and we are trying to reinforce the national police. And Pascale insisted at the beginning on the fact that the security crisis is multifaceted. There's political issues, social issues, economic issues. The 54% of the population is under 25, 31% are aged between 10 and 21. This population has no work, they're idle. The state is not doing its job. They're just focusing on the security, on the crime. We're paying the price for all the bad questions we've put. And the third point regarding society is that we're in a situation where obviously you have these gangs that present advantages. They are creating social links, although these social links goes through very serious violence. These are gangs that are mobilizing communities. They are highlighting the need to have police close to the various districts, and they were almost absent in Haiti. And we're in a very ambiguous situation. There are a lot of paradoxes. There are a lot of risks, a lot of abuses, violation of fundamental rights, violation of human rights. And on the one hand, you have the state, which is guilty because thousands of people are jailed. And then there are gangs who carry out an expeditive justice. So we have to put ourselves a certain number of questions regarding these squads. Should we question the monopoly of the police? The police is ghost-like. It's corrupt. There is a lot of deserters. The situation is disastrous. And to add this point, there are a lot of policemen who themselves have anticipated all the public policies, criminal policies, and they've decided to collaborate and to do this work as vigilantes. So things are not properly understood, and security, which is put forth by the international players, this has led to this disastrous situation that we have today. Not to mention all the economic and political issues. So, 3 questions. So the first, I think this was not broached, although I know that you know about this question, but it was not broached in our discussion. When we were talking about the gangs, about governance, bureaucratization, the increase in the unity between all these different components. Now, the first question is, do the gangs want to become the state instead of the state? Is it an extension of this open question on society? This Haitian society, would they be happy with this violent state that would be taken over by the gangs? Although there are no elections, but they've taken the power de facto. So is that an end as such? These gangs, they want to substitute the state. They are organizing the carnival, as you said. So is there this will, this possibility? Does this exist? The second question is more operational, humanitarian. If we do manage to work with these gangs, and if they extend their power, what is the issue then? Because that would be a place where we work with violent authorities, where we work in chaos. Chaos stops us from working. Now, if the gangs let us work, they allow us to work, can we work everywhere in the 5% remaining? Because we can't work everywhere. That's a fact. We don't want to be forced to not work with some, but in most of the countries where we work, we cannot work everywhere for safety reasons or other reasons. So a situation where the gangs are still extending their control is that a situation where MSF could work more easily? And the last question is the question on protection. And I'm asking this to Pascale. For a feminist organization, the question of protecting women, when the gangs protect us as a humanitarian organization, how can we protect hospitals? So there are three questions. The first is for Romain, and it'll be very brief because I think your answer is very straightforward. It's quite clear to this question regarding gangs. Do they want power? What do they want exactly? Thank you very much. It's $1 million question on the objective of these gangs. But that is our analysis. And among most of these gangs, for most of these gangs, the Haitian criminal groups do not want to take power for themselves. They don't want to control state power. But what's happening through this bureaucracy and with the creation of Vivre Ensemble last year, there is this greater politicization of these groups. They are becoming the central players of the system. And that's why there's this major paradox in Haiti. But the evolution we're seeing, which is quite concerning, is the creation of this political party, Vivre Ensemble. And they announced the creation of this party, which stems from this gang coalition. And you probably heard about this. There's quite a striking episode that took place a month ago at the beginning of the year, where official documents from this transition council, which was supposed to be sent to the CARICOM, which is a Caribbean committee to present avenues for safety and for the institutional reconstruction. And in addition to the 9 signatures, the members of the CPT, in this official document, we had the signature of Vivre Ensemble. And this led to a major scandal in the Haitian political class, who had signed for Vivre Ensemble in an official document, whereas around the table you only had political parties. Who allowed that, and why did they allow that? So here there's a real politicization, and in the coming month, on the 7th of February, today is the 6th, if I'm not mistaken, so tomorrow is the 7th, and it's a very highly political date in Haiti because it is the fall of the Duvalier dictature. It's a very important date in terms of mobilization, so we will see what will happen in terms of the mobilization of the criminal groups and all the players orbiting around these criminal gangs. So the 20th of February, which is the first year of the Vivre Ensemble coalition in less than a month, and the 7th of March, which is the renewal of the transitional group, which will lead to some very violent riots in the streets. So we have a month starting from today, and the nature of these groups will be greater, and I don't think that they will take power for themselves. There will be players within the system, but they will not substitute the system. And we are on the lookout. We are preparing plans for a massive flow of wounded. We are organizing a potential soaring of violence in the future, tomorrow and throughout the month. So this is a time when we'll be very active because of this transition. And on this question on being able to work everywhere, as Romain said on the 29th of February, it is 1 year of Vivre Ensemble. A year ago, if we had the same question, we wouldn't have discussed this the same way. We'd have talked about violence. We'd have talked about what was said. We would have said that sexual violence, civil society, all the difficulties, etc. But we didn't have vivre ensemble. And there were fights between gangs. There was a lot of violence with a lot of impacts. And our position was to accept the gangs, but it was different because we had a network. We had connections that were quite wide, quite large. And as Romain was saying, before we used to speak to just one person, now we have to speak 10 people when we want to move in the country. And to move in the Cité Soleil district, there were sub-areas detained by leaders of gangs, and we had to obtain authorizations from 5 or 6 different leaders so as to move within districts. When the prisoners were released on the 2nd of March last year, there was a lot of concern in the districts in which we work because we felt that with Vivre Ensemble, the former prisoners who were former leaders will claim for their seats that were occupied by junior people who taken over since. So how are we going to reintegrate these former leaders? So it is complicated to talk about the seats in the city because everything is changing all the time. And for us in our operations, we have to be nimble, we have to be agile, we have to have contacts, we have to understand the context. And that takes a lot of time for all the operational people because it's not just choosing to intervene in a zone and then put aside a population. It could mean we could have thought about this, but it's not just that because it's all changed. The whole context has changed. Not what is experienced by the population, but the interactions between the criminal groups, between Bois Calais, the birth of Bois Calais, that was a whole new momentum. There were curfews in certain areas, in areas where things are supposed to be calm. We had to negotiate with new players. And so therefore, for us to be part of these negotiations with everybody, it's a question of principle because we have to be on the lookout all the time. We have to know the context so that we can have this opening. And we don't have this all the time. We have suspended every year our activities once or twice a year, so we don't always have this acceptance. And it also comes from the gangs. There are suspensions we've carried out. I'm going back to 2023 because there were too many risks in Cité Soleil, in our hospital. In 1 year, we counted more than 60 impacts of lost bullets. So we were negotiating with the gangs, but they were fighting in the corner of our hospital. And that's where we would find all the corpses. There were massacres all along our hospital. So although there was this acceptance, it was still very complicated. So we're always discussing on our ability to remain in certain areas, to move, to be agile, to suspend, to start again. It's a real operational issue which is there permanently. And as for the question regarding protection, so yeah, as for protection, yeah, we dealt a lot with this for the victims of sexual violence. And we also realized that by analyzing it, we've been discussing this for many years with the idea of protecting our staff. And in a context like Haiti, our employees, I don't like to say that they're the beneficiaries, but these are the people on which we're thinking. We're trying to work on all these issues regarding protection. It's important to underline this because the nurse, for example, who will arrive to the trauma hospital, she's received a gang member, the gang member who burnt her home, who put fire to her home. And 2/3 of our employees were victims of acts of violence, some of them physical, sexual violence, violence among the members of their family. They had to move 3 or 4 times. Some of them are homeless. We have a home for the staff. They're living under our protection. And we have to see how to take care of our colleagues. And as Pascale said, I don't know if they're hearing us in Haiti, but there's this huge ability to be resilient, and it's really impressive. They are in survival mode, and this has been triggered by everybody, by Haitians. I am looking at things under the vision of our colleagues, but each time there's a change in the context, we are trying to help them. So I wanted to mention this part, the part regarding our colleagues. Pascale. So as for protection, well, it's a very sensitive point for me, for Nogesmao. We are in a feminist organization, but we are a political feminist organization. Most of the founders of this organization are feminist activists, but also political activists. We work on political advocacies. The founders of Negesmao were leaders of Petro K Challenge, the movement against corruption and impunity. And we're not only doing advocacy for the rights of women, but also political advocacy. When the prime minister was named, we worked on the feminine condition. We're putting pressure on the institutions. We worked also at the MMS. And our work is very political. And this always created concerns of security for Negesmao. After the assassination of Jordan Moise, they attacked my home. I had to take refuge at the Belgian embassy. Some founders had to leave the country after the assassination of Moise. This is the third time we have to change premises because of the threats. And we had to totally change the safety protocol for our staff from 2021 onwards and open a home at Carrefour. And this was a major challenge in addition to all the challenges we have on a daily basis as an organization. And today we have 7 members of our organization who are displaced. They had to leave their homes, their districts, and they had to move. And we had to support them economically, but also in terms of the mental health of our staff so that they can keep working. These people receive dozens of women victims of sexual violence on a daily basis. And so we deal with them from a legal, psychological, medical point of view, and they are praised. So we have to think, I mean, these people are survivors of violence, and they're also escaping this violence. And we have to see how they escape this violence and how they accompany the beneficiaries and how they can also be beneficiaries, and the cost for the organization. What it cost us 3 years ago to function today, this cost has tripled in terms of logistics, transport. Today, we don't accept members from our staff to move between the departments. So what it costs us to work in one department, now we have to negotiate, we have to find money for all the movements, air, travel, etc. In 2018, we had an open working space. Everybody could have access to the Negesmao offices. Now we have 3 safety agents who work round the clock for our organization. They are armed, and this totally changes our vision of our feminist organization, what it's supposed to be, because it's supposed to be an open space. Normally, the doors of the organization are open to work with the staff that has to deal with this on a daily basis. That's also a challenge because we have to develop this empathy. We are in spaces that aren't facing the same challenges. Negesmao has decided to do its work remotely so that the staff does not have to go to the office every day. We close our offices earlier, and we'll talk about our beneficiaries. The fact is, we offer legal support. Our organization was threatened because armed groups believed that we were taking information from the beneficiaries to give this information to the police, to give human rights organization information on the gangs. So people coming to our organization felt threatened because when they would come to our organization, they felt that they were targeted in their communities because they would go back to their communities. They would consider the organization as an organization collecting information for the international community to get reports on sanctions, etc. Because we also do advocacy on sanctions for corruption, etc. So it is highly complex to be an organization that doesn't just want to develop humanitarian projects or develop projects in communities, but to be an organization that puts pressure to change living conditions, because this puts us in danger as an organization and creates a whole environment that is extremely dangerous and complex to work in this context. So I could have said a lot more, but this is an extremely personal and painful topic for me, this question regarding our protection network. It's very emotional, and the organizations working in the field, every day it's a challenge for us, but they are still working and it is not easy. And as for the financial challenges, etc., all that is very difficult. Thank you, Pascale. That's exactly what I wanted to insist on, the finances. And it is a real disaster. It's an announced disaster. As you mentioned, Judith, in your introduction, 60% of the humanitarian financial plan was, or I would like to say, is financed by the Americans. Now the discussion is that potentially we will be financed only until the end of February. After that, we won't be financed anymore. And Pascale, as she was saying, her teams have to use the NAS helicopters. So you will have to have discussions in your team to find out the means of doing things. But now these teams won't be able to go to certain areas where they would go in the past. So that means that all the costs, because of this increase in insecurity, because of inflation, etc., this will have a great impact on our humanitarian response. Haiti was really financed. It was a humanitarian crisis that was really financed by the US, and all the finances are minimal now, even by European countries. So there's a lot of worries and concern about that. Hello, Laurence Boutin. I'm from Haiti. I feel that to go to Haiti since 1978, in the past few years, the departure of the MINUSTAH led to a deterioration of security in the country. Although the MINUSTAH did not fulfill its original obligations, but I feel that when they left a legal branch of the UN, and then things got worse afterwards. Am I mistaken? I would like to know what's your analysis about this.
I think that if I go back to something I mentioned earlier, I believe that having a technical approach based on rights and governance that doesn't look at the complexity of the situation, the corruption, the impact of, for example, reinforcing the police system without reinforcing the justice system would bring up more problems than it would solve. I would simply say that there have been several known scandals and massacres in different neighborhoods, but I think it's the general peacekeeping operations that have been underway mean that a new peacekeeping operation would not necessarily solve the problem. So let's take one last question. I was wondering, from the point of view of the Haitians, what distinguishes a state army from an NGO or a non-government organization that's involved with racketing and violence. And to extend that question, can there be any kind of advantage or normal life living that could end up being possible in an area that's controlled by the gangs? I'm going to try to be concise, and I would say that I may be mistaken, but no Haitian would tell you that they would rather live with the gangs than with a strong state. I don't think we should oppose that double negative of either a corrupt, inefficient government or the gangs. The idea is to find a solution which would provide public services and common good. We have to move towards that. And when the question comes up like that, in that way, I would think that no one in Haiti would say, yes, I would rather live with the gangs, even though the gang leaders, in the very short term, without you ever knowing when at one point their domination would create some sort of order and stability and predictability in common life, that domination can turn against you in just a split second. That we've seen in the massacres in 2024 in October, and in the heart of Port-au-Prince, in a place that was dominated by the gangs, which brought a certain form of stability, and then suddenly turned against the population and killed over 200 people in just a few days. So once again, what I would say is that the domination of a gang, just like the domination of a corrupt, dysfunctional government, is just bad. And if you are, and anyone would rather live in normal conditions. And regarding the Haitian society, I've been working on Haiti for a couple of years, and sometimes there can be periods of relative calm and then periods of tremendous tension. And what's fascinating is the way that the Haitian society reacts so quickly to these very rapid transformations in the society. But I think this illustrates something that's difficult to understand, and that's the school systems. If you go from a tense situation to a calm situation, the first thing that Haitians do is to send their kids back to school. So in other words, if there's a public service, a school, services that function, you go towards those services, even though it's not always easy. But there's always that will to get back to a normal life. And when I'm in Port-au-Prince, and unfortunately I've never been to Port-au-Prince except in a crisis situation, that's all I've ever seen. But what I see, and it's fascinating, is that when normal life comes back just a little bit, you've got people out in the street, you've got kids out in the street, the bars open, there are concerts, and that's what people want. Just 2 words very quickly. There's violence and there are gangs, but there's also the pauperization. For example, in Cité Soleil, there's an article that's going to be coming out very shortly about women who live in Brooklyn in Cité Soleil and who talk about that gang violence and who's in control. 10 women a day are victims of sexual violence in a relatively calm neighborhood where there's no gang violence, where basically in the past year things have become more peaceful in a certain way. And this week we even took in, for the first time, men who were victims of sexual violence. So I don't think that we can talk about. I don't think that because the gangs have taken over, or because the gangs are no longer fighting among themselves, that the situation is okay. There's not enough food. There's food security is insufficient. Food goes through the gang leaders, and so if the gang leader doesn't want to give you your bag of rice, then he just won't. So, and I think that's just really horrible for the general population. Pascale, we've gone over time actually quite a bit already, so please could you just very briefly conclude? Well, when we take in survivors of violence, it's not due to conflicts between the gangs. It's because these women are within those controls, those neighborhoods that are controlled by the gangs. We had a woman who come in with her daughter, and she said, "I'm going to stay out in the street, but can you please protect my daughter, because there's a gang member who's decided that he wants my daughter as his concubine." And so there might be a crisis systems when a gang attacks another situation, another community, but that those gangs are still the cause of tremendous violence. And the general population wants good governance and the end of corruption. We want a minimum of public service and a minimum of tranquil living. So the choice will always will always go towards a state, a government that can bring that. And as is Haitian, I can say that that's what we want from the transition government. We want that the public service and the peaceful lifestyle to become possible. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank our 4 guests, Sarah, Arnaud, Pascale, and Romain. I'd also like to thank Teddy and Nicolas and the stage management. I'd like to thank our interpreters, and sorry that sometimes we got a little bit carried away in the speed of our speaking. Maura and Arun Kutz for interpreting. Thank you to Michael for the help during the preparation. I'd like to just finish by reminding you that the drinks will be served downstairs if you'd like to continue talking about this, and this conference will be available on the Crash website. Thank you very much.